Thanks for joining me, Chris Ewing, and obviously we're going to have a conversation, so it's going to be informal. I haven't got any set questions. We kind of know what we're going to talk about, but at the same time we don't. So for people listening or watching, could you please just introduce yourself and just briefly your background and what you do currently, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for inviting me. So yeah, I'm Chris Ewing. I am head of client management for impact forecasting, which is part of Aon, and we're a catastrophe model development team. We develop catastrophe models, so models for things like floods, earthquakes, windstorms. We have some man-made risk models as well, and yeah, we develop them primarily for the insurance industry, but also for other industries and other sectors, things like disaster risk reduction, also occasionally for humanitarian use as well. So the big picture is the models we make, helping people to understand a bit more about natural catastrophe events and how they might impact both people, buildings, and finances as well. Yep.
Great, thanks, Chris. And again, intentionally we haven't had set questions, but clearly for the benefit of people that don't know what we're going to talk about, then the BIM in this context in BimTube means better information management. So yeah, we'll be focused on obviously data information management, technological digital enablers, but maybe talk around the benefits and outcomes of these things rather than the technology itself, which again, might be apparent to us, but perhaps isn't to people trying to sell the technology. So I just, as a broad sort of sweeping question, you've given a brief background to what you do, but just maybe you could just drill down on the journey that you took to get where you are, because just in a bit more detail to what you've already said, because people like us do have a data background. There's a lot of people in data now that are not from that background. So maybe just a little bit more detail about your background and how you progressed.
Yeah.
If you would, that'd be really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I am a physical geographer by background. So still keeping the links to geography in my career now, which is great. So yeah, I studied after physical geography course in Leeds, did a master's in GIS, so geographic information systems, geographic information science, and then worked in local government on things like planning departments, for example. They're heavy users of maps and information, and then after that moved into, well, first of all, the kind of wastewater industry, which was an interesting sector, and then working for Halcro, so a consultant engineering firm, around civil engineering projects, so kind of road, bridge, big infrastructure, but also some environmental projects as well. And then from about 2010, I joined Aon to work in the impact forecasting team, where I started as a GIS person, really. So using those mapping skills and using them as part of these catastrophe models that we build. So understanding a bit more about what's at risk, so whether that's buildings or whether it's populations as well. So a lot of manipulation of data as part of that process. And then from that, I would say the last 7 years been more in a client-facing role, so helping some of our customers and colleagues understand more about how the models can be used and how they can help inform catastrophe risk management. So yeah, so I mean, that whole journey, kind of GIS has always been at the backbone, and I'm still very much in touch, I hope, with things around geographic information systems, mapping, touching in not so much building information management, but at least I'm aware of the concepts there. And then that spreads into the other thing I forgot to mention was I'm a volunteer for MapAction, the disaster mapping charity. So I've done that for the last let's say number of years, so quite a few years. So that's kind of I've been a volunteer all that time through those changes in day job, if you like, and that's another piece. Disaster mapping and event response. That's a big. There's a lot around information management there. We could hopefully talk about in the next while. Just around managing in a disaster. Who knows what's happening where, or almost presenting an overview of the situation to help inform the people that are helping to respond as well. So yeah, lots of things going on.
Thanks, Chris. So I mean, why don't we start there? Because you mentioned that disaster risk response and planning. Why don't we start there? What are some of the big challenges? And again, to the target audience for what we're talking about today, I would say are people that are not data professionals necessarily. So what are the what do you do? What do you do? What's the approach, and what are the challenges? I don't want to ask you too many questions in one bundle, but I guess the thought process for me is, what, as a data professional yourself, what are the big gaps in people's skills, and how do you help people, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So maybe I bring in an example. So with the work we do and the voluntary work we do with MapAction, and there's 100 volunteers in MapAction as well. So I guess what we do is respond in the event of a disaster, generally natural catastrophes, but occasionally conflicts and things like that. So that's one of the things we do. The other piece is one, event response. The second would be around emergency preparedness, it's called. So preparing communities and governments to almost building up that capacity so that when a disaster happens, they're better prepared. But yeah, let's think about the event response. So that could be a hurricane, for example, where you might have some idea that the storm is coming, and you can at least get people ready to be on the ground after it happens. It might be an earthquake where there's obviously no warning, and the event happens, and then you need to send people out. But yeah, typically then that process, what happens, there'll be local responders, local government responding to the disaster. There'll also be international responders. So MapAction work with the UN and the International Federation of Red Cross, Red Crescent as well, to be on call in the event of a disaster. So a disaster happens, a call goes out to say, look, can you come and help? And then the staff at MapAction come out to the volunteers and ask who's available to go, literally within like 24 hours. So sorry, I'm talking more about the operation and the mechanism of that. But yeah, so you'll be out in the field, responding to the disaster. And the big piece that we provide is that information management, really, that help with understanding the situation on the ground, knowing, for example, what resources are needed and where the gaps are, and then what could be almost put into an appeal to be supplied to people. The other thing is the kind of helping with that coordination. So often we may deploy with a UN team called Disaster Assessment and Coordination, and what they're trying to do is have a kind of cluster-based system. A cluster system is based on the different needs, whether that's food, water, sanitation, and share knowledge between the different sectors with local NGOs and international NGOs about what the picture is on the ground, and how what can be how the international community and the local community can help people that are affected. It may really, and bringing that like to life, it might be really simple things like, where are the roads blocked? Where is there a need for food and water if water supplies have been hit? So there's a few like really practical examples of where you can almost map that and provide an overview of the situation. And these maps are very much of the time as well. So like 12 hours, 24 hours, 30 hours after the disaster, they're going to be updated and changed to give a clear picture. Sorry, I'm getting right into the detail there.
No. It's all very important because someone has to do it, right? So I think, and obviously imagery is released, I guess, I'm putting words in your mouth here, but the latest aerial imagery is released, then people digitize, capture information. That, I mean, that's the it might sound obvious, but again, people that haven't heard of this before, the process, you capture, you draw over it, and then that's shared. And how is it shared? Because I'm interested. I mean, the assumption would be it's on handheld devices, but there's probably actual physical paper still used.
There is, a lot of, there is, on the imagery. That's a challenge that can help. I guess it's what you're trying to see, what the type of event is. For a flood event, occasionally you'll get satellite imagery of where the flood is or was. Often the problem with a satellite is that it's not always at the point. The satellite isn't over the area of interest at the point of the highest floodwaters, if you like. So you don't always get a true picture of what happened. But quickly it becomes less about the hazard, if you like, and more about the impact. So imagery of yeah, if you can identify really rapidly, if it's a large, for example, the Pakistan floods that just happened, massive areas of land were affected. So in that case, satellite imagery is really helpful. If it may be a bit more localized, if it's a storm, let's say hurricane, for example, that comes through, obviously still quite a large area affected, but you might be looking a bit more at the impacts and getting reports, a lot of written reports as well, and things coming in from different communities that might be just text based. It might be a paragraph of text saying, look, this is the impact in this area, this is the impact in that area. So yes, there might be satellite imagery as a source that we want to put on the maps and share, but more generally there may be lots of different reports coming in, and it's about almost bringing that to life on a map. It might not necessarily be a map either. It might be a different type of visualization, but something that kind of shows over the area of impact what the priorities are. That's the key thing, I think. So that it's drawing that data, if you like, isn't it, and making it meaningful information that can be shared with people that are looking to respond and to help, rather than just I don't know, 20 written reports from different villages and no idea of how to kind of prioritize them as well.
Yeah, because you say the word visualization, I know there's some initiatives through various organisations in the UK, Royal Geographical and British Cartographic Society. I've seen initiatives from them, but obviously that my original background is in cartography. So obviously maps are maps, and we'll always need maps. But it's interesting the shift of, and I agree with you, language to visualization. We're seeing more sort of dashboards, and it used to be that it was harder to make them. Frankly, like the capability now we can make them in minutes, but I don't know if you've got anything to add on this, whether on the topic that we're talking about or broader about data quality, because the sort of the challenge could be that because it's easier to rationalize and simplify and data and put it on dashboard, you could end up with a compound or cumulative risk of data. So have you got anything to say about data quality, how it, maybe not loads of the detail, but how is it checked or validated, or how are people vetted, or how does that work?
Yeah, and I think my fellow volunteers in MapAction could say a lot more on this than I could. But I guess the first point, definitely I'll come on to data quality. It's a massive key factor really in the, whether that's a map we're creating or visualization, or you mentioned kind of online dashboards and things. So in each of those, the data is really key component. And I think what we're trying to do there is, if possible, have data from multiple sources if that exists, so some kind of point of reference or validation of that data. I mean, the other point is to try to show the uncertainty of that data as well. So almost saying, look, this is the reports that are coming in. This is what we can pass on. It's, secondary information, secondary source of information, if you like, and caveat that with trying to show where there might be missing data or unconfirmed reports and things like that. So we're always trying to, we're not trying to, we're trying to paint an accurate picture of the situation, which, where the information probably, isn't complete, and often is, it could be missing. And that's the same, whether that's a paper map we're sharing with responders on the ground or online maps that go through the MapAction website. And the same with the data as well. There's also that confusion with the data quality. Maybe it's more of a just the related to data quality, I guess, but the kind of age of the data. So, are you looking at, if it's a population figure or an affected population, are you looking at a baseline figure and it's total population, maybe from a census that was taken 15 years ago, and then you've got affected population that you're getting reports from, maybe from local government or from a head of a town council. Just trying to bring those the data sets together to paint a picture of what's actually happening. Can be challenging as well, especially in a disaster where the last thing someone wants to dig out potentially is some baseline. No one wants to tell, maybe there was a census done in 2015 and you've got the 2005 data. The last thing anyone in the response wants to do is start digging into the old data. It's all about trying to save people in the moment.
Yeah, and being able to automate things. I was just purely coincidentally, I was looking at some data earlier from data.humandata.org, which is OCHC services. I don't know. But anyway, so this is open source data, but I was reading this. This is for population density in a country in Southeast Asia. Anyway, and they say they use satellite imagery to automatically extract population density.
Yeah.
So again, it's out there. I guess what I'm implying is I would say there's a lot out there. I'm not saying you wouldn't know. You'll know a lot more than me. But what I mean is, it takes people like us to know where it is. I think that's always a challenge. This is our day job. I think there's so much out there. It's really hard to know where to look sometimes. I think,
there is, yeah. And then because we're kind of on that part, the humanitarian kind of mapping part at the minute. I guess things like humanitarian data exchange is one, and other things like common operational data sets that are published by people like through the UN, through Office of OCHA. Sorry, I'm coming out with lots of acronyms here, but one is around around that data standardization. There's something called humanitarian data exchange, which is about feeding out data in a consistent format and the metadata as well, so that you don't want to be let's say, for example, in Pakistan's floods most recently, you don't want to be landing in Pakistan and not knowing where the data is. Obviously, you want to be building up that picture of data that's available, so that when the response happens, you're ready. And we're doing a lot of work in MapAction with that to prepare the data that we keep on, so that we can better respond. And then we're also working with different governments to help governments understand the type of data that that should be ready to hand to help in the response phase, basically.
And you mentioned the data set I was just quoting actually does have humanitarian data exchange at the bottom.
There you go.
There you go. So that is a just again for people listening or watching, that's a metadata schema agreement, is it? That's what that is.
It's effectively exactly, exactly. A way of exchanging data, a way to make it, I guess, it's easily searchable as well. So you could say, specific country, I want to find, like you said, population data, or healthcare information, and that would be readily available. And again, like a mixture of free source, a mixture of where to go to find it as well.
I think I'm absolutely fascinated about MapAction, but maybe we're just on the theme of data, we just move off onto the sort of more the insurance side of things, because that common theme of data, whether people want to call it interoperability to confuse people, or schemas, or I know they're not the same thing, but metadata, all the issues around how we exchange data, share data, understand data, is obviously a persistent transferable theme. And I think it's still not really cracked, is it? So whether I know you implied BIM, you don't really do stuff with the BIM, but I can assure you that's all that's about, really. It's about how do we exchange data when we build stuff. I know there's more to it than that, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're getting at. It's a theme. That's why I've seemingly moved into other sectors. It is just that, but in a different sector. So we call it something else. Is it anything to do with sort of your insurance role around? Are there international data? Because I want to know as well. Are there international data schemas and metadata exchange for insurance and reinsurance purposes, or are we not there yet?
No, there are, and I think there's a number of different schemes, and I'll can I maybe start with a few and then land on one. Maybe we can talk more about. There's standards like Accord is one, so lots of acronyms here, but AACORD. Another one is CRESTA, so CRESTA, and the third one would be something called open exposure data. So those data standards are all about trying to describe in a consistent way what's at risk, but generally property. So information about buildings, property, whether that's a house, a shopping centre, or a cement works, or industrial facility. Like just trying to describe the what's at risk. So things like I don't know, age of the building, what it's made of, occasionally the condition as well, the type of materials it's made from, and so on. So there's many, and obviously everyone, people that develop software around risk modeling, catastrophe risk modeling, and other types of insurance modeling, whether it's loss or claims types of software, will have their own potential methods of coding all that information up as well. But yeah, there's a big push at the minute in the industry, at least the part that I'm in, catastrophe modeling world, called open exposure data, which is about trying to describe what's at risk, the buildings, property, but it could also be, it's being expanded to things like marine as well now, so describing things like, ship information. But yeah, having a consistent way of describing that, so a consistent set of codes and descriptors of that data, basically. So yeah, obviously the idea being that there's kind of one, well, there will never be one way to describe it, but at least there's a way to bring data into that format so that it can be shared more easily, I guess.
Yeah, I think your comment there about there'll never be one, that's I have that on a twice weekly basis with various clients about what's the best way. I go, well, who's asking? Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, obviously you're right. Everything will have to be ultimately like a Venn diagram, won't it? Things are always going to overlap as long as you can map it. But again, that's interesting because we have a data background, so we think, oh, we just map it. It's a data model, we map it. But then even that concept is challenging, quite rightly, for people. You know what I mean? They think, oh, we're actually going to have to map it. And I go, well, no, you could automate it. Without sort of naming names or anything, are they throughout your career, so maybe not the current job you have, but are they conversations you've had often about people not understanding what data models are, or schemas, or metadata, or I don't know. Have you got any anecdotes around that? You might not do, but I seem to find it all the time. People without a data background are at a disadvantage because these are all new concepts. I don't know if you've got any examples.
Yeah, I think, I guess, day job wise, I'm in a place where it's almost understood. I guess they can, at least people understand that it's part of the role to, and maybe quite a lot of kind of data literate people.
Maybe in your past, but I guess that's a challenge because you are a data professional working with other data people. But maybe in your past, I mean, because that's I'm in that strange land now of talking to people that don't know data about data. But I guess you're not quite there. But is there anything from your past that you remember, or maybe in construction?
Well, exactly. I think it's all about the kind of the purpose, isn't it? So I guess from the past, and things that have almost spun out of control, right? So if you don't have, it might have been, I've got a case in point that was well publicized actually from the recent COVID in the UK, right? That was, I mean, we can share that story. Was there not a way of tracking the cases of COVID, and they'd use an Excel spreadsheet or something, and they'd instead of the data being organized into a nice table, each day was a separate column, or each time, or each survey was almost a separate column in this spreadsheet, and they very quickly, and I can't remember which government department, so I won't say any more than that, but I guess I think it was well publicized in the press as well, but quickly ran out of room in this spreadsheet that kind of wasn't designed for the kind of ongoing survey. It was never, I guess, so it's one of those things you see time and again, I guess, is where data is being collected, or the actual end, the kind of end result wasn't anticipated, I guess, or the kind of ongoing use case wasn't anticipated.
Yeah.
So something was designed very quickly for a very specific purpose, and then someone went, oh, let's use it for something else, and then quickly the schema changes halfway through the process, or as data is being captured and so on. But yeah, I mean, the other side of that, isn't it, is as you get into kind of big data and unstructured data, then we started to see organizations saying, well, it doesn't matter, we'll just deal with that later, almost. So that can become an issue, I guess.
I think one of the classic examples, and you mentioned that there is date and time, that always is almost comical on occasion. I've inherited spreadsheets with the date in every version format you can imagine. So that's a classic one, isn't it, where people, there is an ISO standard for how to write a date. People don't get it. I go, oh, no, there is a standard. It's just that that's not typically what people talk about on a daily basis, because they talk about what they did at the weekend, not an ISO standard. But then we know that, so we can bring it across to other people. But I think data is a good example. And the example you give about not looking at the end game. You mentioned unstructured data, and I guess we're alluding to AI and machine learning. Is that something that's used for your day job, or have you been involved in what would be called artificial intelligence or machine learning?
Yeah, and I think we kind of shift more towards the the machine learning description than AI. I think AI obviously sounds really cool, but yeah, on the ground, I guess it's more. I guess what machine learning is probably a bit more apt. But yeah, as we develop, so we actually develop catastrophe models. So we're using so that's like I said, that's kind of made up of exposure, what's at risk. It's the hazard of what's the, for example, let's think about a hurricane or a tropical cyclone. Where will that path of that hurricane go, and what would the wind speeds be across that area that the hurricane track is going through, for example, or flooding in the UK, for example, or windstorms in the UK as well. So where is the hazard, where is the wind speed going to be, then the vulnerability, how that's impacted, how a building might be impacted, and then calculating what the loss might be. But yeah, so we're using a few different and my colleagues, not me, but machine learning approaches for things like I don't want to get too complicated too quickly here, but with the hurricane track example, looking to generate effectively, we call them stochastic hurricane tracks. But what we're trying to do is, within the parameters of what's possible, from a climate perspective, generate randomly tracks that follow that pattern. And there are kind of various approaches. One of my colleagues had one published, approaches in machine learning to look at the historical data and to generate hurricane tracks, basically. In a computer model, right? Yeah, we're not generating these in real life. that would be good. So and then I guess wider than us in the area we're in, catastrophe modeling. I mean, machine learning used for all sorts of things, whether that's claims information and claims processing, for lots of other aspects as well. But yeah, I know from our neck of the woods, I guess, with the satellite imagery and the mapping, a lot of machine learning approaches to trying to, again, extract what's at risk. So extract buildings from satellite imagery and so on. So yeah, there's quite a few approaches there.
And it's sorry, go on, Chris, go ahead.
No, go on. I was going to say the other kind of machine learning approach might be more, and I'm not near that area at all, but I mean, people could look up that later in terms of using machine learning approaches for almost kind of pricing mechanisms in terms of how insurance might be priced based on demographics and things. So, there's lots of approaches. As there are in your world as well. Yeah.
No, well, I mean that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Just sort of coincidentally, I've moved sidewards into some of these aspects, like feature or building, for example. Recognition is something I'm currently interested in, that kind of activity. How you automatically extract features and have an area, a polygon. Even if it's just a flat 2D, and then maybe look at 3D at the. Of course, this is done some places. It's just finding out where. One of the data, I know we're just talking about machine learning, but this may or may not be related. But I was looking at one data set, was the OpenStreetMap polygons for buildings, which I think, I need to look more at the data. I think some of them are extracted using sophisticated, they're not just manually digitized. So again, maybe I need to look at that one. But I was quite surprised how detailed they are at different building groups. Like a dozen polygons. So you can, it looks like people haven't digitized it, but they have been extracted. So maybe there's a bit of homework for me to do there. But I think that sort of democratizing the data. Obviously, there are products, and you get the extra attributes and the quality that's required. But I think we're seeing a shift even in other sectors, even in, I won't name any of the organizations, but some of the organizations in the United Kingdom that are famous for sort of mapping and that are starting to look at third-party data, because the question, I mean, we've both got a background in engineering, and I'm sort of still work with engineers. It's like, how good, in inverted commas, what does that mean? Does the data need to be? Like, what's the purpose of and I know it's obvious, and that's what metadata is about, but I think people don't speak plainly enough to say, well, what are you going to do with the data
Yeah.
Now, I know you've just said that, but just real simple terms and not even clever machine learning stuff, just real simple. What's that survey for?
Yeah.
People can't articulate it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whether you've seen that in the past, probably again now in your day job, not so much because you have advanced products, but that's a common theme, isn't it?
I think the other thing there is just that, yeah, like you said, the kind of level of detail that's required as well. I mean, like you said, the example of extracting the building from the imagery, that's great, but then there's a kind of data augmentation piece of bringing in, and I'm definitely not talking about building information modeling here. It's like very much a stage before. It's almost like a 2D. Here's a footprint of the building. But can you tell me from imagery maybe a bit more about the attribution of that building? Is it a pitched roof or a flat roof? From other imagery, can you tell me the building height as well? Which is quite important for our models that try to quantify what the damage might be, especially for things like earthquake. There's different, if you like, vulnerability to a tall building compared to a short building, what the building's made out of. Unfortunately, you'll never be able to tell, I don't think, from an image if there's a basement in the building, but that would be interesting for flooding as well.
Who knows? They might have remote ground penetrating. You never know.
You never know. Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
Terrifying, but
yeah. So all that attribution, that's still, you wouldn't think in this day and age that. I mean, I think in the UK we're pretty much in a better place in terms of knowing what every building's made from and so on. But in other places, that data just doesn't exist, and it's very helpful from, well, obviously for kind of insurance, but also from from all sorts of aspects, right? Government perspectives, from kind of building management perspectives as well for some of these commercial industrial places, just knowing what it is and how old it is and the maintenance schedules and all sorts.
100%. So again, that's how I even got involved in anything like disaster risk insurance, was asset management, strategic asset management, which includes maintenance and FM. And I think that's creating more of a demand. So when I talk about BIM, it's actually the international standard ISO 19650, which is about whole life. Yeah. Not necessarily a 3D model of a building. And I think that demand for whole life information, then the question is, well, where do we get it from? And then how do we maintain it?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's the question, because if you've got billions of pounds for a new X project, whatever the infrastructure type is, you think, well, I think we should get good information. Like, you've got billions of pounds, and we're in the 21st century. Like, and we've got amazing laser scanners. We should have amazing information. That's a management challenge, not a technological challenge anymore. So, and that's what BIM was about. And now it's about how do we maintain it? And that's why I think everything we're talking about, then there's an immediate parallel, because that's kind of what we've got more experience in. Well, there are data sources out there. Maybe they're good enough. There's different ways of extracting features. And it's that maintenance of, in this case, physical asset or infrastructure. Yeah. It's the same, isn't it? Because then...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's the same skills needed. And I think that's where there's still a big challenge, and one of the main reasons for these podcasts. But just completely changing the topic, if I can, we might even move off insurance just briefly, is asset management, right? It's not the most, for some people, it's not exciting. For me, it's very exciting. But do things like ISO 55000 get mentioned? Asset management by name, FM? Because you mentioned maintenance. So does that get talked about a lot? Is that a thing? Or
I think it does. I think not in the area that I'm in, to a great degree, but absolutely, my colleagues at Aon and across the insurance world, absolutely. I think the asset, the kind of the risk management aspect is obviously there, right? And if you can know more about what you're insuring, which can come obviously through asset management, because you're creating a register of what's there and a maintenance schedule and all sorts, that absolutely obviously demonstrates that this is maybe more a bit on the commercial risk side than where I am. The models that we use are generally used by insurance companies. This is probably more a risk manager and maybe a large company. They'd absolutely be wanting to have a good asset register, a good asset maintenance register, and share that with, as a risk manager, share that with their insurance broker or their insurer. to demonstrate that they understand the risk, if you know what I mean. They understand mitigation as well, and what they could do if, for example, I don't know, one of their buildings in their that they're looking after is in potentially in the floodplain or something. Then what could they do to mitigate the risk? Is that about having the ability to bring in temporary flood defences or something in advance of a flood? But yeah, just in general, that absolutely leads on to BIM as well, doesn't it? In terms of I think insurers will always value that's a word, but value that information, and be if you can demonstrate more about the building, then they should be able to help in terms of the insurance cost as well. It's the same as what's going to cost more as an insurance premium. I think that's poorly maintained and badly managed versus one that is well maintained, well managed, and so on. So
yeah, and that's why I mentioned it again. It is so obvious, but they are often split because of the domain expertise. Like you were saying, that might be a different division, quite rightly. But again, like I say, that it's a sophisticated risk to understand hazards and perils and vulnerability, but it's still a risk. Do you see? I mean, like if the building falls over because it's old, that's also a risk. Again, I know it's a different way of putting it, but again, that's how I got into these things. Like, is a bridge about to fall apart, or it wouldn't? But how old is a bridge? Whether we get flooding or not, if it's not like exactly what you're saying. I think it's just making sure them risks are ranked.
Definitely, yeah.
But clearly it is a specialized type of risk, the ones that you've been talking about. And I guess it's levels of detail as well. So whereas for residential, for use a household, other people that own a house, it would be obviously you wouldn't have that level of detail. But if you're a company with a large factory, large commercial operation, you'd have risk managers looking after that, and so on. And we try and bring a little bit of, maybe that's more on the infrastructure side, but we try to bring some of that, if you like, those details into our models. So what's at risk? We have a series of, we call them modifiers, but effectively descriptors about a building or about infrastructure, so that they can be modeled more accurately. And then other types of infrastructure, flood defenses, for example. In some of our models, we look at the standard of protection in terms of what the flood defense was built, the design protection standard. So is it built to fail, or at least 1 in 100 year probably, 1 in 1,000 year probably, or whatever, of failure of that defense. And we build that into our models so we can show, if you like, that uncertainty in the models. Now I don't want to get too complicated, but I guess what we're trying to show is, a model is a representation of a reality. We're trying to show the possibilities of what a financial loss could be, and really bring in all those assumptions. So really much it's about, probably the same what you're doing as well. It's about understanding the assumptions and documenting them and sharing them as well. And then the feedback again, because in your domain, it's obvious you feed back in real events. This is what you do. That's how you can have stochastic models and probability. Well, look at really what happened. And again, I'm sure it's not unique, but it's obvious you do that. And financial asset management will also look at real world value. A lot of other people don't look at real world. That's where this term digital twin has come about. Whatever people think of that, I actually quite like it. That implies, or it doesn't imply, explicitly talks about this feedback loop or maintenance or bi-directional flow of data. So that's something you do, but that's in other sectors people haven't done that. So for example, in my career in infrastructure and just GIS itself, it was a one-way thing, right? Someone surveyed something, we did map stuff, we did some spatial analysis, and then it went through, and then maybe if you're lucky it would get updated. And I might get a survey. I was using measured survey more than aerial stuff, and I think that's that bi-directional flow. But my question is, do you talk about digital twins at your place of work, or is that not something that you talk about yet? Because you do modeling anyway, or
so I think not yet. I mean, there's a few things around the side that I've been involved in where the kind of concepts has been discussed. But like you say, I mean, the digital twin is a kind of representation of reality. Then we're we're kind of doing that with our modeling already, as coarse as it is, because we're not, you can imagine if you think about what I've described so far, we could really go to town and have a complete representation of, let's say, every building in the UK, a nice 3D representation, and bring that into one of our models, and really go to, the kind of detail. Thinking about, I was involved in a project called Icebreaker 1 last year, which was looking at, net zero underwriting, and the concept that was again a little bit around what's at risk in the building, and talking to other organisations that are involved in the digital twin approach. So I think it's interesting. I think it's the kind of it's the applicability to the scenario, to the situation. So whereas you might not do that for residential property, because I guess generally I guess the risk is low, and that's why I hope at least our insurance premiums aren't very high in the UK. But then if you're looking at commercial, industrial risks, infrastructure, these big infrastructure projects that cost a lot of money, then obviously you really want to model that and have that, like you say, that bi-directional flow, don't you? You want to, if you update in real life, you want to update your digital record as well, and keep that digital record as up to date as possible.
Yeah, and I think it always depended on the sector. So large infrastructure, asset intensive sectors that I'm more familiar with, it was always the safety case, safety, cost.
Yeah.
Okay, but it was always safe. And certainly when I was doing a lot of the BIM training, I always said, well, we haven't really had that focus on buildings. And sadly now we do, because of Grenfell. So that's fire. So we talk about the golden thread of information, this persistent, in that case it's regarding fire safety, and there's new legislation around it. So there's tragically there's the case, the case there about having persistence in that case of fire and safety critical. And I can see it in other sectors. Slowly it'll become mandated in law that we have to have digital data. It's not quite there yet, but it's different. I always find it quite interesting, the commercial aspects and the insurance aspects and finance are obviously way ahead, because of the sort of focus and imperative of the value is clear. So, and it could be financial, but just to ask you broadly, are things like triple bottom line discussed where you work? So the value of an asset not just being financial but social. Do clients ask about that, or is environmental? And that leads on the implication is sustainability. What do people? Open question. What do people talk about sustainability and value?
Thanks. That's that's a really key one, isn't it? So in terms of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, then it's a big part of what we're doing at the moment. I mean, the piece that I'm in obviously is the modeling. So thinking about things like climate change and the impact of climate change on property, basically on lives. So we're looking at that because our clients, insurance companies and big corporations, are asking those questions too, as everyone wants to think about, quite rightly wants to think about what the impacts might be. So what we're doing there, we're effectively, so our catastrophe models, let's think about atmospheric perils, because that's what we're talking about really. If we're talking about climate change, earthquakes are off on the side there, but for atmospheric perils, wind, flood, wildfire, also tropical cyclones as well, windstorms, then climate change, an increased temperature increase, or change in precipitation can obviously impact how often and how severe these events are. So we're bringing different climate change scenarios into the models to show what the impact might be in 10, 15, 20 years time. In terms of the current day, our models are based on historical records, so up to the present day, if you like. So we've kind of got that picture now, pretty understood. And then looking out to the future, people are very interested. companies interested in what the impacts could be 10 years, 20 years into the future, and also as like different insurance companies are also looking at a whole strategy around environmental, social, and governance and climate as well, looking to potentially stop writing business in areas that aren't sustainable and focusing more on things like renewable technologies and things like that. So there's quite a large overlap with what we do, because we can provide the model that helps with some of those discussions. Likewise, we've looked at some of our models being used to look at the offshore renewables, for example, and where they're situated. You don't want to situate them in an area that's, obviously you want the wind, but you don't want too much wind. You don't, you don't want them to fail because of heavy storm that causes the wind turbines to break or whatever. So there's a few different use cases, but what it's really about, I guess, at that high level for insurance companies, it's about knowing, what the future risk might look like, but also knowing what the uncertainty of that as well. No one can tell you in 15 years time, 2 degrees of warming, it's going to be 2 degrees of warming, and that means there's going to be 20 more hurricanes in a year or something. No one obviously can tell you that. So what we're trying to do is build in different climate change scenarios to show what the range of possibilities might be. It can never kind of be, it's going to be X in 10 years time. It's going to be a range of things.
It's about informed decision making, isn't it? Again, that's obviously you're focused on that, but again, it's with a lot of the work I do, it's making sure people remember that's what we're talking about, because it's not just getting data. We could, if you can write a blank check, which most people can't, but if you could get every data set known to humankind. But what are the decisions, or what are the questions that we're trying to answer? And that's a different proposition, isn't it? What are the questions? And some of them are, can be financial. So the regulators in UK and other countries are asking banks and the insurers, with climate change, and let's say in 10 years time, if looking at different scenarios, basically, if that shows there's an increased temperature, increased precipitation, what would be the impact to your business, basically? So that it's those kind of stress tests, I guess, that companies want to do to obviously look at ways that they can maybe mitigate that risk, and also promote more sustainable within the company itself, but also for maybe an insurance company's customers as well, how they might be able to promote more sustainable ways of working. That's probably a bit more for the commercial and industrial sector than it is for the residential, but but it is telling that narrative, isn't it? It's like the data is transformed into I was going to say story, but it's a communication tool. But part of it is all these different layers. I'm slightly going off topic from data here, but I'm quite fascinated around the data, and you've got the obviously there are challenges with how we present data, but let's assume they're standard formats. It's also the narrative around it that I'm quite interested in, the story. And I often, so in my world, it's around the benefits, outcomes and benefits, which is great. I mean, that's amazing that we're talking about that. We're talking about ESG, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. Absolutely. But I think what we're talking about today is what consequences could be. And again, I think insurance, that's what you focus on. That literally is the data. What could be the consequences? And I think, again, other sectors aren't quite there yet. It's not because it involves scenario. It involves getting the right people in the room. So again, that's been a challenge, but we're starting to see it. So where I'm going with this is I can see some of the thought processes from certainly insurance coming across to other sectors. I've been working in public sector and public sector asset registers in the last 3-4 years again, and there's sort of learnings coming over from private sector asset portfolios. But without giving any of your commercial secrets away, just again, this will be a technical question. How do you do the hierarchy? So can you say, for example, we might have an asset, let's say a station building. Do you have areas? I know this is very specific, but I'm just curious. how is it divided down? Do you have sites, areas?
Yeah, in terms of how the modeling might look.
Yeah,
You
different.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
different geographic hierarchies is what I'm
Yeah.
getting at, right down to a building.
I
Like
see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that. I mean, there effectively is a hierarchy, exactly. Yeah, I wanted to take you. Yeah, before I go on to that, maybe just like your earlier point there on
please.
the communication of the risk. I think there's,
Yes.
like you said, there's, you can do very complicated things with looking at thousands and thousands of events, but sometimes, yeah, scenario event is the best way to think about it, or at least a way that you can get that communication going, to say, well, look, here, what if, what if, a flood event happens here, what would be the impact to you and, your company or your organization, and use that as a communication tool. And that's some of the work of things like the Insurance Development Forum. They work with World Bank and a few different insurers, and country governments are thinking about those types of scenario planning as well, and that's throughout the kind of world disaster risk reduction. But yeah, sorry, going back to your hierarchy, yeah, exactly that. Sometimes the data might be so poor that you only know, for a given place, that you only know, let's say you only know the counties, or you only know the regions that the things that are insured and where they are. So across a whole country, you might have 8 regions, and 20% of the value is here, 10% is here, and so on. And that's really, but our models will take that really coarse information, and then within the model we disaggregate. We try to make a decision about where, we take the large and we try to make a decision about where the property might be located. So based on population data, land use data, we try to make those decisions. But yeah, then the other side of that is we can go right down into the detail as well. So if we have the coordinate, the place where the building is, we can bring that into the model as well. So it depends on the use case as to what people want at the end of it. I mean, the other thing that you'll see from your world as well is things like, we also produce flood hazard maps, for example, and things like that. So we kind of get right down into the detail of that topic as well. But yeah, on the building as well, that depends. Sometimes commercial, industrial facilities will know the value of each building within the complex. We'll know what each of those buildings are made of, and so on. But in other cases, we may just know the postcode or the zip code it's in. So there's a real mismatch of information. You think by now it'll all be standardized and it'll be high quality and high definition, but it's never like
that. but I guess what I'm thinking is that still keeps coming up for me, and I know it will with you, and that's where this data domain expertise is still required. Things are not. Yes. If things are off the shelf, data products, solutions, they are, but a lot of things are not. It's often legacy information, legacy data. Back to your example you gave of the date of a date. This is the classic location and date or time is the two. Sort of, that's been my bread and butter for at least 15 years. But and also what do we name things? I think that's quite interesting. Is it a such and such building or another building? I think, but again, with I think it was, what was the metadata? Was it open? What was the metadata open method?
The one in well, we've got so Foundation, well, Oasis catastrophe open source cap modeling framework, but they've got a tool. So that's another thing I brought in. But effectively, the kind of custodians of open exposure data, OED, which is in the insurance world, how we're looking to kind of standardize the wrong word, but at least have an open exchange format, I guess, for exposure data. Yeah, but you're right, exactly that. It's metadata about buildings, or about moving on to looking at ships and marine, I think, next. But yeah, a way to describe and categorize building information.
I only mentioned it because that would force the hand for that conversation. That was all. Sorry to, because I know we already mentioned it, but close the loop again.
Yeah, close the loop. Yeah.
People without necessarily a data background, that's where you go to the standard just to force the conversation. I often enjoy a conversation where people say, "Oh, we don't like that standard," or "It's not quite the one." I'll say, "Well, okay, fine, but we're in a meeting talking about metadata and data standards. This wouldn't have happened 5 years ago." Do you see what I mean? So I think, obviously they're fit for purpose, but even if they're not quite fit for purpose 100%, it's still a foot in the door, and you're having the conversation.
Yeah, exactly, and it's and now I'm thinking, as you were asking earlier about potentially areas where people don't, data literacy might be less good. You're right. It kind of brings about, well, here's a standard that maybe you haven't got structured data, or you've really got your portfolio looks like it's a kind of regional level and there's just no detail at all. Then let's discuss something like open exposure data as a way to start capturing that data in a more of a standardized way. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and then you can go to case studies. Again, that's obvious, but I think that's something I often try to focus on, is this is what it would mean if you don't do it. There's I don't want to say carrots and sticks, but there's incentives and disincentives of not doing things which we just know, and it might not be apparent to other people. So just to ask you again, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. I mentioned it. We kind of talked around it, but just straight up, are they mentioned at your place of work? Do they get talked about with your clients, or not really? SDGs?
Well, I think I think they do, but in the wider kind of environmental, social, governance framework. So for sure, as Aon, we're following, that path in ESG, and that will align with the SDGs. I mean, that line of where I'm in creating catastrophe models. I guess we're obviously out to try to better quantify what the risk is for natural catastrophes and what climate change can look like as well. So I guess we're kind of almost following that same path as well. I mean, I guess from the kind of MapAction work and some of the work we're doing in the emergency preparedness, disaster risk reduction space. Obviously, the sustainable development goals get talked about all the time, and it's kind of key. There's a lot in there also, isn't there, around kind of training and communication of risk as well. That we're kind of almost living and breathing that in some of the training and the work we're doing there. I've got colleagues in MapAction that are part of the GGIM, and I've forgotten what all the G's are there, but the UN's working group on geographic information management. So they're kind of right in there, and that they're all aligned as well, obviously, with these sustainable development goals as well. So obviously, obviously, what I'm trying to say, well aware of them, if not like talking about them all the time, if that makes sense.
I think that's exactly right, that you're saying you're actually doing them, if you like. That's part of your bread and butter. I was just asking just to help promote them as well, because I'll go to conferences and I'll see people with a pin badge with the colors, and I'll say, okay, UN SDGs, and then I think a lot of people wouldn't immediately know what the pin badge means. So I think maybe there's some promotional challenges as well. I just thought I'd mention it, because obviously outcomes, everything I do, and like you say, you're working to them, obviously has to align up to these bigger goals, outcomes, benefits, and it's just, how do we explain to people? Again, it's maybe self-apparent for the work that you do, but I think other people it's harder to make that link.
Make that link. And it makes sense.
We're getting towards the end of our time. You've mentioned several websites, so what I won't do is because normally at the end I'll say, where can people find more information, and then put list. What I'll do is the ones that you have mentioned, so you don't need to mention again unless you want to, is link to them, so that the different data standards, we've mentioned several things, and I'll make sure they're there. But is there anything you haven't mentioned? So again, we've only been speaking for about an hour. Clearly we can only cover so many things, but we can only wayfind people. Are there any other resources, websites, or industry bodies that you think people might want to go to? So again, assuming that people are newer to this type of topic, so digital data, and today we're focused on insurance, reinsurance, and disaster risk modeling. Is there anything else you haven't mentioned that people should look for?
I think there were a few. Sorry, I won't go read out another 10 minutes of links here.
Well, no, go for it. Go for it. No, it's important because we know, but we've got. Sorry, you know. I won't know. You know, but that's your whole career. So please do read them out. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a few on that I'd like to mention. I think we met each other. I think from the Association of Geographic Information, which has got its conference coming up, and I think one of the themes of that conference this year is sustainability. So we should definitely put a link out there to, I think, the Geocom event that's coming.
Geocom, good shout out. I'll endorse that.
And then I'm part of the Royal Geographical Society, and we've got a disaster risk management professional practice group. So that's all around risk, wider kind of disaster risk management topics. So we're trying to bring, as part of that group, different forum for people to talk. We've got a few webinars coming up there, so that'll link across insurance, disaster risk reduction, humanitarian, NGO, but also the kind of wider aspects of risk management. And I think some of the work you're doing is key to that as well, because it's all about understanding the risk. And then final one, I think I half mentioned it, but day job, impactforecasting.com, MapAction.org is the charity. The Insurance Development Forum, I think, is quite interesting in that it's thinking about the wider topics of disaster risk, not just in the insurance world, but also the wider societal aspects. So thinking about lesser developed nations and how you can build a community of understanding around natural catastrophe risk and other types of risks. So it's all about, hopefully, some of those links and the things. It's all about that communication of and better planning. You'd rather invest more in the planning than you would in the response, because a lot of these things can be prepared for and planned for. So that's probably a few.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And it reminds me of everything that we talk about. It's all about improving that process, isn't it? It's the everything's possible with data, but it's how do we automate the process and try to automate things where we can. So it involves better information.
Exactly.
Type out. So I better leave it there. I think I've taken your time, and I could talk all day because you know me. But I'll thank you for your time, Chris Ewing, and thank you very much. It was great to talk to you, and who knows, we'll maybe do it again one day. But thank you. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thank you.